Welcome to Tomorrow's People, the podcast brought to you by Personio and me, Perry Timms. Everything starts with people, and everything needs inclusion and diversity. Rob Neil OBE is a leading voice on how we create a more inclusive culture and society for tomorrow's people. So welcome to Tomorrow's People podcast, Rob Neil. I say that, but I mean, you and I go back decades, right?
It is decades, literally decades. I was reflecting on that in the run up to this moment, and goosebumps. Just thinking of the moments we met and did those early bits of work together.
Very nice. And work is the topic of this, as well as all the interrelational stuff. But talking about work, what's hot for you right now? What are you up to right now, Rob Neil?
Wow. Well, right now, work-wise, I'm running my own consultancy. As we record this, it's actually 2 years to the day that I started it.
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. So 2 and still a going concern. I'm still a bit freaked out by that, to be fair, because I can absolutely remember the run-up to that moment. The kind of very much feels like a crossroads, actually. But letting go, as I put it, but letting go of my beloved civil service after a total of 38 years working as a civil servant. So when you put those two figures together, 40 years in the workplace, HR, human resources, my professional anchor, as it were. But and that's, it was in and around those elements that you and I met, and looking at things around, giving people a runway to offer their best. Really encouraging people to be their best in the workplace. And that's been a running theme ever since. So my consultancy is called Krystal Alliance. That's Krystal with a K. KrystalAlliance.co.uk is where listeners can find us.
Nice, thank you.
And have a little splash around there, if you will.
And I love that thread that you've pulled already about the sort of the energy side, because whenever we got together, and it'll be the case now, there are energy sparks, aren't there? And I guess we converged over the passion that we had for the work that we're doing and the people that we're doing it with, right? And there's a kind of an inflated term that we could use about belonging to do with that. Because I know you and I felt that we belonged to what we were doing. And we belonged to other things that were part of that kind of equation, I suppose. And your reputation, I think, is about how you've brought people together in a communal sense, with interest, all sorts of topical areas to balance, to bring that verve and that kind of sense of, I've got this. I need this. This is me. And that whole sense of belonging is where we get so many different definitions of it. But what are your kind of hot takes and perhaps the sort of chills that you get about things like belonging in the world of work as you're seeing it now?
Sure. All of that's true. All of what you speak of there, Perry, that certainly get me excited, that kind of fuel my passion, that kind of gives me the energy and certainly the motivation to do what I do is around working with people, groups of people, growing those groups of people to offer their best and to welcome the best in everyone that they meet. And certainly, whether it be staff networks, employee resource groups, affinity groups, forums, call them what you will, but building a critical mass of people that are committed to making work better has always been a heartbeat of mine, and one that I'm always prepared to share and want to share in that when I meet it in others. So it doesn't take a lot to work any of that out. When I think back about where you and I first met, the things we then signed up to together, the things we signed up to independently of each other, but then come back to meet. But whether we are working together through those staff networks, or whether we are working together through what's now known as EDI or DEI, whatever you want to call it, equity or equality, diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
All of it rooted in this heartfelt belief that we are together capable of making work better.
Yeah.
And if that's what I end up belonging to,
yeah.
and I find myself stood or sat next to Perry Timms and others like that, then I'm happy.
Yeah.
I'm happy about that.
You took my mind to some really nice places there when you were talking almost about the multiple set of definitions, but at the heart of it, you're right, that togetherness is really, really important. And I think you and I know, and a lot of people listening to this have probably got the experience that it just doesn't always happen by default, doesn't it? It's not a natural rite of passage. You join a workplace, you get to know your colleagues, and then you see certain different things happening. You're like, that doesn't feel quite right or unfair. And that then dampens the best that person can potentially offer. And as you were talking about your role in that, I've heard a management definition quite recently where it talks about people being conveners. And that's what it feels like you've done a lot of, particularly in the more recent parts of your career. You've been a convener, haven't you? You've brought people together around themes and issues to resolve. Has that always been a thing for you? Have you always been a convener?
Well, it's a word. You've got me thinking about that now, Perry. But I guess that's also true. When I think back to my earliest memory of what I wanted to be, when I grow up, and I'm still growing up now, but when I think about what I want to be when I grow up, my first ambition was to be a professional footballer. But I realized relatively early on, and certainly early enough, that I was never going to be good enough to be earning my keep as a professional footballer. Love it as I do. And to this day, love playing when I get a chance, but certainly watching all that I can. But thereafter, with any kind of sensible option, I wanted to be a police officer.
Oh, wow.
But I wanted to be a police officer because of my proximity to people in the street. That's how I saw myself if I were to become a police officer. Not necessarily solving crime, but preventing crime.
I know what you mean.
But that kind of, working with people in their everyday, day to day, to remind everyone that we've always got a choice, even in those darkest of moments, is to say to someone, you've got a choice about that. To this day, I still work with younger people making their way from education into employment, and where they might have made unworthy choices, but reminding them that you've always got a choice, even if you feel as though you don't. So you don't have to necessarily yoke with this questionable activity or that group of people. What you can do is go high, as Michelle Obama would say. And you can love them from a distance, but you can still offer your best in the lane you're in.
Nice.
And you can take your efforts to another level without being pulled back. And that in our exchanges, we can be edifying, we can lift up rather than leave someone feeling less than. And back to the workplace itself, what I found in this convening you mentioned is that people would feel safe and comfortable and confident enough to share the turbulence where they had bumped into that. And some of that turbulence can be quite ugly, actually. It can be quite intentional in terms of the perpetrator wanting to hold someone back, wanting to put someone down. And I refer to it as the ugly end because in my experience, and only in my experience, it is the minority of occasions on which that occurs, but it's no less impactful for the victim.
Of course.
And so what I wanted to do and still want to do is to create workplaces that hear those voices.
I know what you mean.
And offer, whether it be an A&E, a pharmacy, a space to heal, a safe space for people to recover from any of that turbulence. And to come again with their best efforts, to offer again what they are fully capable of. That's what I'm committed to.
Some very nice things in that. That was a lovely way of describing, firstly, the darker side of belonging, where perhaps you feel a little bit devoid individually. So belonging gives you a sense of something that overcomes that. But it might not always be a positive choice. And I love that you use the word choice. And then to pick on that, the choice bit that I'm sort of really kind of starting to ruminate on now is how people do choose to be hurtful, harmful, unequal, blocking, preventing, discriminatory. And we've seen it perhaps in the last few years much more obviously. Isms, racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, all sorts of things like that. We've got lots of names for them. And I don't know about you, but I thought at a point in time, it's almost like maybe we've got over some of those things, but they've kind of reared their heads again, haven't they? So I guess our work is not done, for sure.
No.
We have a lot more definitions and lines to take perhaps with it. And I guess what I'm really liking about that is what you touched on at the end of that, which is safer spaces for understanding and healing. Because that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And that healing concept, I suppose, is where we do think about healing psychologically. So there's a lot of psychology in your work, isn't there, would you say?
I would say, I would say. And some of those words I'm catching up with. I mean, it is what it is. And then you sometimes find out what it's called and what it's referred to afterwards. I remember when I first bumped into the phrase tempered radical, and it felt like a fit for the kind of behavior that I was exhibiting and others around me in the groups we were forming. But I didn't really understand what it meant academically, what the research behind it was. And as I started looking into it more, Perry, it made more sense.
Okay.
You know, the fact that you had, you know, within the approach, you had a proximity to the fault lines in organizations that permitted you, equipped you, empowered you to curate solutions to what was going on in the organization. And so I got really excited about that. I remember working flat out on building and championing and supporting tempered radicals, people who love the organization they work for, but at the same time, and because of that love, could see what was wrong with it and wanted to do something about that. And they weren't, you know, career-minded individuals. They weren't there to, you know, hold anyone back. They were there to make the organization a better place. And I couldn't get enough of that. That's something I wanted to swim in, to be a part of, and to encourage. And what I find in the present day is that, further to the point you make, Perry, about individuals who might want to deliberately cause harm, deliberately destroy safe spaces, or have people feel unsafe for whatever motive. And there are a few, certainly in my experience, that they would create ways in which they could do that and not be detected. So whether it be, you know, fake news, false comparisons, and, you know, all of this kind of stuff that ended up, for the want of a better phrase, but muddying the waters, and getting in the way of people coming to work with all of what they wanted to bring to work. Again, their choice, but you know, we talked earlier about labels, but authentic in the workplace. But, you know, bringing to work what you want to bring to work, and feeling as though that's possible. I remember supporting some individuals who, one case in mind comes really clearly to me. Individual who for nearly 6 months would make their way physically to work, Perry, but couldn't cross the front door, the threshold of work. Would turn and go back home, and so would report sick for nearly 6 months because of the fear they had around management in that space. And when we started working together to support this individual, it was revealed that this was the pain they were going through because of the way they were made to feel about circumstances in the workplace.
Which is tragic, isn't it? Because it's a kind of psychological thuggery, isn't it? It really is that. So I know there are lots of things in the press about bullying, and there are lots of things and legislative changes that are coming in to make whistle blowing a little bit more easier. There's lots of topical stuff around that as we're recording that. But I do want to go back to some of those lovely things that you just put down about tempered radicals, because I think there's something in there, isn't there, about, again, belonging to a cause that is more important than perhaps the administration or the work that you're doing, but it's a part of that.
Yeah.
It's this wraparound, it's this underpin, it's the soul of it, really, I guess. I love that phrase. And you talked about fault lines, and I think that's an interesting metaphorical link as well to the fact that, the earth is pretty stable until the tectonic plates shift, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's what happens in organizations.
Yeah.
It's pretty stable until something happens, and then there's a blow up. But really, again, that's been probably happening very slowly until the point
that it goes. Absolutely.
And your story, which has such vividry in it, of somebody who is physically going there but can't psychologically cross that threshold. That's so damaging, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the activist in us perhaps comes to that.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether you're seeing and have experience and believe in the sense of kind of a noble cause that talks to that equality, because again, some people justify it by going, here we go again, everything's against a certain group or pro a certain group, and it's like, I'm not sure you've quite read the room, I'm not sure you've picked up all the signals. So is the nobility pursuit there in equity, and that's what drives a lot of us to it?
Well, I think that must be true. That must be true. I certainly, when I look to examine what puts fuel in my tank, or these days I should say charge in my battery. But when I look to examine that, it is rooted in what I signed up to when back in October 1983, when I signed up to becoming a civil servant. I signed up to what's known as the Civil Service Code of Conduct, but that in itself has evolved from the Nolan Principle to public office. And when you look at those clearly, they are about honesty, objectivity, integrity, accountability. And, notwithstanding the performance of any present day government, whatever color or shape they may be, I believe in those. I know the vast majority of civil servants believe in those. And I will always believe in those. Those are almost now a part of my working DNA. And when, for that reason, when I experience, or indeed it is brought to my attention that individuals have not been, not just because everyone as a serving civil servant is signed up to those, but as you mentioned earlier, some people choose a different path, choose a different way. But when I then encounter individuals who are not living those out, it disturbs me. A different kind of passion rises up in me. And it's the machinery I have within to then to redress that. We can't change history, Harry, but we can change its shape
completely,
and we can shine a light on it, and we can reveal the truth about periods in history that we may all share a level of shame about, but we can now redress and we can now repair. And I think whether we are talking about formalized reparation or correcting some of what went on, we know that in the present day, there are people who are benefiting from what went on before. And because we can be clear and confident about what went on before, but we can now redress it today. And I think whether that comes in the shape and form of an apology, an acknowledgement, but we must act on what we now know to be true. And I think that those things are with all of us as an injunction to take action. And I think when I see present day leaders, some of whom are elected, some of whom have won their position through other forms of practice, taking an option that doesn't seek to redress that, there's a concern I have. There's a determination that lives in me to redress that.
Yeah.
Because somewhere along the line, those actions are preventing sometimes groups, communities of people from offering their best.
Yeah.
And that can't be right.
No.
That can't be right. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. says it best, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Totally right. And you made me think about the kind of social fabric that work has and is, just as there's a social fabric in a community that you live in, or those like us, we choose to belong to certain clans and tribes, like the football supporters, the music genres, whatever it might be. But we are attached to a number of different elements of that, aren't we? And in some of them, we see the equality in it, and it helps us be our best. And that even makes it more anger-inducing when we then go somewhere where it should play by the rules. Work is a construct of a series of rules and parameters and predictable outcomes. And then all this messy stuff comes in. It's quite difficult to compute, isn't it, sometimes? Like, why is that happening?
Yes, indeed. Anger-inducing, as you say.
Yeah.
And sometimes with that anger, we can what grips us immediately is some of the emotion around that. And I think it's often referred to as the amygdala hijack. But, we get torn away from what needs to happen next, and we react rather than respond. And these are difficult moments. These are challenging moments, particularly when, it speaks to a specific value that we might hold. But I can absolutely remember very, very clearly a decision I had to make growing up in the civil service, starting when I was 19 years old, but literally just over a decade into my career, being approached about being a lead for a project that would consider pulling together a group of people to address racism and racial disparity, not just in the organization, but in the services we offer.
Okay.
And I remember it very, very clearly, because it was as if everything had come together to say, this is, as someone who walks in faith, this is something I was called to do.
Yeah.
And I knew that my approach would not exclude the target audience in any shape or form. I knew that my almost inherent, but almost lived experience of difference, Perry, would include people of all races, would include people of all political persuasion. And I recall later on reading a book that was indirectly recommended by President Barack Obama in his first inaugural run-up on the presidential campaign. He was reading a book called Team of Rivals, which was about a period of leadership of Abraham Lincoln. And in that book, I think it's Doris Kearns wrote this book, Doris Kearns Goodwin. I may have that name wrong, but certainly Team of Rivals. It talks about Abraham Lincoln's hitherto unprecedented, but his ability and capacity to bring groups of people together across traditional lines.
Right.
So although he was a Republican, he would often involve Democrats in the decision-making spaces. And this intrigued me because I thought that this was something I was doing naturally, because why would you get a group of people to make a decision about something who all thought the same thing? Now, later on, Perry would talk about things like groupthink and echo chambers, but I didn't know about those terms. I just felt that it was important, if we were running a network for Black staff and I wanted someone to talk about the music of Black origin, I want someone who knows their stuff. I don't care what color they are. Up pops Perry Timms, the soul man, aka the soul man. And it was a wonderful opportunity to illuminate and turn up. And you know this, Perry, you were alongside us on the journey. But for over a year, people didn't know who you were.
Exactly.
They just knew that the soul man was writing about music of Black origin or whatever people wanted to call that. It's great stuff.
There's something lovely in that, isn't there? Because, there's this sort of transcendent thing that we sometimes have, which is like, it really doesn't matter because. And that talks to what you beautifully described as the calling
Yeah.
And this is where emotion in the workplace is sometimes very difficult for people to handle, particularly if you get into leadership positions and you're trying to bring people together. So I talked about convener you earlier. That almost feels like you're already channeling that energy. When you're a leader and you've got these recruited people around, you're trying to assimilate all these energies and you're trying to create harmony, understanding, and so on. It's a tough gig, isn't it, when you're doing that? And your calling in that project, I think, just shows you sometimes how, without preordained, conditioned thinking, you wanted to do the right thing. And you didn't know whether that right thing was bound by any definitions or prescriptions or whatever. There's something beautiful in blank canvas type stuff that goes on in this space. And what I'm kind of leading to now is that's an early inception. And you're right, I was a very active part of that group at the time in the court service around the Proud network that we ended up colluding on. And it was a calling, it was a belonging, it was something that really, really got to me. And that was an early experience of mine in what was then called staff networks.
Yeah.
And we now look at them perhaps slightly differently, and employee representative groups tends to be the kind of name for it now. So on that, are they a kind of an evolution of what you are? Are they a kind of fab thing, or is there a bit of a fad thing going on? And where do you sit and like to talk about when ERGs come into conversation?
Sure. Yeah, great question. You asked whether they're the fab or fad.
Yeah.
I think, and in my experience, Perry, they can be both.
Right. Okay.
Either or, both and.
Okay.
I've recently done a bit of work with one organization where they've got 93 ERGs. This is an organization of about 40,000 people.
Wow.
And they've got 93, at least, and this is no exaggeration. When I started the work with them, about 2 weeks prior to a keynote presentation I then gave at a conference, when I arrived on the day of the conference, just 2 weeks later, they had 94.
Oh
so in 2 weeks, another one had spawned. For me, staff networks is my preferred title, but employee resource groups, affinity groups, call them what you will.
Yeah.
I think of them as fundamental.
Yeah.
I'll go for another F on the fad or fab.
Yeah.
Because whilst they can end up being fab or a fad, here today, gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think staff networks have always been around. Some of them are formalized.
Good point.
Another F. Some of them functional. Some of them, are fleeting. Let's go with the Fs. But they're here today and gone tomorrow. And they're nothing more. And this is not to lessen them, but they're nothing more than an expression of a voice unheard that wants now to be heard.
Yep.
For me, the real litmus is whether or not the network in question can align themselves with corporate goals and be a critical input in what the organization needs to be doing, both within and in what it offers, service.
Very nice.
And so for me, I often talk about what I call the 3 C's model, but I often talk about criteria, creation, and competence.
Okay.
And I talk about criteria, about why this network.
Why? Yeah.
Ask yourself the toughest question. If you cease to exist from tomorrow morning, who would miss you? Really?
Yeah.
Would your members miss you?
Yeah.
Would the organization miss you? Is there something you offer that is so intrinsic to your day-to-day existence that without you, the organization will be less than?
Great test.
And sticking with that C criteria, I say to certain leaders, and this is all part of the chemistry exchange in the early days of any conversation I have out of Krystal Alliance with a prospective client, is I say, the smart leaders, the really clever ones. I don't mean the ones with loads of letters after their name and an academic library. No disrespect to any of that. But the real smart leaders are the ones that really understand that by investing in those networks, which are going to exist anyway,
true,
by bringing them on board and to the table, like a well-timed TUS inquiry, that actually we are going to get to practicable solutions a lot earlier in our journey.
Yeah. Nice.
Let's have everyone at the table in those decision-making spaces. And you know what? The reward we then invite, the reward we welcome, is we may end up finding out a deeper insight about a group of people that we may have taken years, if not thousands of pounds, to an external consultant to find out. Because actually, we've had the solutions and certainly the best responses in our midst all along. So whether we're talking about race, gender, ability, disability, whether we're talking about caring responsibilities, whether we're talking about, the LGBTQ plus community, let's have those who have got those lived experience, I like to call the intrinsic owners of those issues, in the decision-making spaces to give us our best chance as leaders to make the wisest choices. Giving us our best chance to make the wisest choices.
I think that's a kind of ripple that will come through this podcast. The best chances of making the wisest choices, because wisdom is a really tough thing to engineer these days, with so many data feeds and depth of data and divergence of it. So I think you're right about that sense of representation and accessibility. And I kind of look at it as collective intelligence too, right? It's people coming together to do things that help your intelligence. And that point to the smart leader, I think, is where we're going there. Because how on earth can an organization say it stands strongly to serve the widest community possible, or in a commercial sense, have as many people buy what we do as possible, if inside they're not tapping into what do you know about and how do we reach and what's good ethics on? And so I think there's almost like a direct feed, isn't there, to the viability of an organization in that respect. And I love the thought that you might seek belonging to something near to you that feels safe, but it might then start to evolve and express how you can influence. And I'm guessing that's a theme throughout a lot of your work, which is how do you then influence to get the right outcome? Hey friends, it's Perry Timms, host of Tomorrow's People. In HR, support is key. Supporting your work, your people, and your organisation. Personio truly gets that. They've got your back with top-notch support in your time zone. Visit personio.com and see how they can support all your HR work. That's PERSONIO.com.
In a way, what I then, and I literally bumped into this, I think it's Zadie Smith that says in her book White Teeth that hindsight's always 20/20.
Oh yeah.
And I remember when I read that phrase, I thought, oh yeah, that's right. Because I bumped into this literally, it feels like years afterwards. But growing up as I did in the civil service, Perry, for literally 38 years when I let go, I was at times surrounded by, I remember working with a team of lawyers with, just overwhelming levels of IQ. Just very, very clever people. I mean, we used to, as a term of endearment, I should underline that, as a term of endearment, we used to refer to them as brains on sticks.
Nice.
I mean, they literally, their bodies existed only to transport their brains from one place to another. But not blessed, not fortunate to carry alongside that brain power any kind of EQ, that that emotional intelligence, that self-awareness, that self-regulation, the motivation, the empathy, and the social skills to do the stuff of the heart. Head stuff,
awesome.
They're your person. Heart stuff, don't be asking, because they're not. Many of them were not leaders of people. They were leaders of legislation. They were leaders of practice and protocol, but they weren't leaders of people.
Right.
And again, this is all in hindsight, Perry. Looking back, I can see where EQ, emotional intelligence, enters the fray. And even in our appraisal systems, we went from a kind of a fixed focus on looking at what people did to including how they did it. It's no good hitting all the targets if half your team's off on stress leave.
Exactly.
And that was a real challenge for some people, a real challenge. For some of us, it was a real welcome addition to the quotient party. We need some emotional quotient in there. And then the real kicker for me, the real beautiful new guest, the new quotient on the block is cultural intelligence.
Nice.
Because what cultural intelligence says is, it's one thing having the IQ. It's great when you supplement that with EQ and you get someone who's proficient in both of those. It's a beautiful thing. But what about that person's ability to work in different cultural contexts? And not just race and ethnicity, as the word may imply to some. But I'm talking to you, Perry, so you get this straight away, I'm sure, and many of your listeners will. But cultural intelligence includes organizational culture. It includes geographical culture. It includes departmental, divisional. I let go of my civil service career working at the Department of Education, 6,000 people. I'd come from a department with nearly 80,000 people and something like 4 different departments within the one Ministry of Justice, including the prison service and probation, but 9 different IT platforms, just a real plethora of, and all of them different cultures, all of them different cultures. And what cultural intelligence offers us is a focus around our drive, our knowledge, our strategy, and our action. Putting it in its simplest terms, those are the key capabilities around cultural intelligence. And I remember, again, quite vividly, that almost in the same way that tempered radicalism kind of gave me fuel for a year all at once, turbocharged my day-to-day. That's what cultural intelligence did for me, because I knew we were surrounded by very, 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 very clever people. Some of it was contagious. I was getting clever.
Nice.
I knew that we had a lot of emotional intelligence, and I think that's probably my starting point personally. But I knew that the two worked together. Then we had this third quotient,
third dimension,
and it was the third dimension, and it was in some parts of the civil service, Perry. To this day, it's the missing piece. It's, dare I say it, the secret sauce. And again, the smarter leaders, this is where my optimism comes from. This is where my renewed excitement about the future comes from. Some of our smarter leaders, Perry, are saying, we need a bit of that around here. We need more culturally intelligent leaders, not instead of EQ, not as a preference to IQ. Keep that with you. Keep that with you.
I like it.
Let's bring on CQ.
And De La Soul said it, 3 is a magic number. So you've got 3 there, haven't you? But I would anticipate, as people are reading this, they are either going to ChatGPT or Google searching and they're looking at cultural intelligence. I would say definitely it's a thing, and it will be more of a thing. I think clearly for all those reasons you articulate, which almost takes me to a point of how we identify culture. And often it is, people say it's the way things get done around here, or it's how you feel on Sunday before you wake up and all that. It's like, they're nice little folklore lines, aren't they? But some people do try and numericize and analyze this stuff, don't they? So like culture diagnostic stuff, I mean, is that a good thing? Or again, is that a bit of a fad? Are we seeing almost like a commoditization of culture through that? What do you reckon to that?
Well, you're right. A lot of stuff around culture, is a feeling. And it's, it's in the temperature we take. And even before we see the scores on the doors, people have a sense of what the readout's going to be. And so when those two factors come together, when those two elements come together, you will get a lot of the kind of push and pull around well, you know, I can't tell you what belonging is or what we need to do to secure it.
Yeah.
But you'll know it when you see it.
Yeah, I
you
know
know,
what you mean,
it's that kind of
it is,
juxtaposition that becomes quite difficult to articulate sometimes.
Yeah.
And I've learnt,
Yeah.
didn't start out this way, Perry, but I've learnt not to wrestle too hard with that.
Okay.
It's just the way it can be. It's a bit like, how can you, it's like describing the taste of chocolate to someone.
Yeah. Nice.
I love chocolate, but not everyone does. Now, hardly a day goes by that I don't have a bit of chocolate, which is why I do need to get into the gym regularly, because I understand that chocolate has some properties about it that would cause you to put on weight, perhaps more than you'd want to. And so you need to mitigate and take action to ensure. So I need to make room for my chocolate. And that's what I do. But I can make that decision. I think the link I think I'm trying to make here is that I think there is value in getting some scores on the doors around these things. That says, you know what, next time round, whatever that period of time is, we need to do better. You know, you and I did some work on employee engagement. Where you kindly came in and done a totally inspired speech about, you know, people offering their best. I can still remember it to this day. I think it's important that if we go from one period to another, typically a year, but sometimes in-year surveys, to say if our level of engagement was here at this point, our level of response to the survey was at this point, how can we do better next time? How can we encourage individuals to complete the survey more next time round? Because we want to know your views. You said, we did. You know, every view counts. So how can we increase that response rate? How can we improve our engagement score? But scores in and of themselves won't cure us from some of the other stuff that goes on, the ugly stuff we mentioned earlier in this pod. So we've got to keep our eye on both. We've got to keep our eye on both. And so it is with the kind of juxtaposition of how we feel about stuff and how we end up describing stuff. We've got to be able to find room, I think, to carry both. And because we are that smart, we are that good, we can carry both.
Good.
I think it's when sometimes, and this speaks to the whole cultural intelligence point, sometimes when we force ourselves down a road of, you know, zero-sum game, you get some leaders who believe inclusion is their oppression. Because if you're telling me I've got to give up what I've got, that means, or make room for someone else, that means I'm going to lose out.
I know what you mean.
And that's not the case. And so what we need to do is to live that out, carry that with us into the conversations we have, so that people can see more of that. That actually there is enough for everybody here.
Great point.
And that's what we need to be about.
Great point. That almost takes me to the fact that people do think about this as a defined thing. And it's almost like, no, you've just bust that myth and said it's a bit more quantum than that, right? It can expand and grow. And I think that's really important.
It's not either or, it's both and.
You're so right. So I think if there's some advice there, it is continue to do that, because it does give you something, but that's not it. Right. So that's a really nice way to look at it. And I guess in my mind, as you were talking, I had this lovely vivid image of gymnasts who get ranked on their performance, right? They get scores, don't they? Until they give that up and join Cirque du Soleil, when it's all about the performance, because the numbers don't matter then.
They don't matter.
So there's an interesting metaphor.
Exactly. There's no podium.
There's
no podium. So no one's defined.
That's it.
That this is what you're moving towards. And great where there is a podium and there can be, you know, a gold, a silver, a bronze. I get it. But actually in the place of work, what we're really looking for is that broadest of podiums that has room for everybody to exist. And remember, them bringing what they choose to bring to work, because they feel safe, they feel secure, and they do feel that this is they belong here. They belong here.
And that loops us right back to the start. So just to sort of bring this to a close, I think you're absolutely right about the fact that what we are talking about here is people being able to bring their best and recognizing that there are inhibitors to that, restrictions to that. They may not be that obvious. Some of them are very subtle and underground. But there's something about how we collectively look at that, talk to that, do something about that, which I think loops us back into that whole nobility thing and the choices that we make about that. So that's been terrific. So anything to wrap us up that you want to share, Rob?
Well, because I knew we were coming together for this, I have a gift for you.
Oh my goodness.
I do. And so listeners, if you can't see this and you're just listening to the audio, he is suitably embarrassed because I've taken him by surprise. One of your questions that you were thinking of asking me was about writing a book.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't go big on this because in a funny kind of way, I have written a book. I say funny kind of way because it's co-written.
Okay.
5 of us got together, led by the wonderful Steve Frost out of included.com. Do check out that site, listeners, if you get a chance. But curated, and 5 of us got together to write this book called The Key to Inclusion, Perry. And I have a copy for you.
Oh, wow.
My contribution, touching on a few chapters, but I wrote the chapter in here around cultural intelligence.
Beautiful.
Chapter 3 for the record. But it's called The Key to Inclusion, published in June of last year. Not sure when this pod goes out, but back in 2022. And it's published by Kogan Page.
Nice.
So that gift, I'm handing it to him now, listeners.
Thank you.
Is for you, Perry Timms.
And I'm just
with all my love.
For those thank you very much. Well, I definitely didn't fish for that, but that's given me a bonus. So yeah, The Key to Inclusion is a read I will dive into and put on the bookcase that you'll see on my Zoom calls.
And what me and my team of associates at Krystal Alliance, we are working with public, private and voluntary sector organisations. I guess the privilege I now enjoy is being able, as I reflect on my civil service career, as I step into a 3rd year as a consultant now, I'm 9 months off my next milestone birthday. I'll be 60 in May of next year.
Bless you.
And I'm in a privileged position of very much being able to choose who I work with.
Nice.
Now, when I say that, I don't want to sound complacent. No. I'm still keen to win certain bits of work. I'm still keen to do certain projects. What I mean is when I have my, what I call chemistry meetings, but when I have that setup meeting with potential clients, I'm really interviewing them.
Nice.
I'm really trying to work out if they're serious about cultural transformation. And so when we start exploring and excavating what could possibly be offered out of Krystal Alliance, and it's happened once or twice in this short space of time, 2 years, where I kind of don't get a real clear, strong green light on doing what needs to be done. I say no. We're not available. Now, sometimes that might be cost and budget. Very rarely is it that. It's more about their
intent,
their will, and their intent. And if they're not, if they're not ticking some of those healthy boxes, then I invite them to look elsewhere. I invite them to really think again if they're serious about this. And I say to them, the door's always open.
Nice.
If you want to come back and do this properly, or at least with a real full heart and a real commitment, then Krystal Alliance is here. We involve to evolve.
Nice.
That's our strapline.
Involve to evolve.
Involve to evolve.
Nice.
And we very much work alongside our clients to deliver what's needed on their journey and wherever they're at on their journey.
And I think that's a final lesson really for listening to this, isn't it? Which, lots of people talk about things like equity, inclusion, diversity, belonging, and kind of go, it's really hard. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. And I think you're right. If then people kind of go, I'm not feeling that and here's why, there's a kind of, okay, I'll go rethink that then. So I think, we don't give up at the first attempt. It is an ongoing thing. It takes many forms. And right is subjective, and there are lots of ways that we can work together to go, that's the best for now, and then we'll get better, and then we'll evolve to evolve. Exactly that.
Absolutely that.
I think we'll leave it on that note, Rob. So thanks very much for that.
Works for me.
Good stuff. Well, Rob Neil, thanks very much.
Thank you, Perry Timms. Soul man.
Enjoy the rest of your year. Thank you very much. Yeah,
Indeed.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Tomorrow's People, please subscribe and check out our previous episodes from wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you want to transform your people processes, head to Personio.com.